The service bay at Sutton Elite Motorworks smelled like money and machine oil. Blake Sutton was mid-sentence, explaining the restoration timeline on a 1971 Lamborghini Miura to a client in a cashmere coat, when the side door opened and a 15-year-old girl walked in carrying a stack of papers her mother had asked her to hold. Blake stopped talking. He turned slowly, looked at Zara Mitchell the way a man looks at something that has wandered into the wrong room. Took 3 steps toward her, reached out, and pulled the papers from her hands without a word. Then he dropped them, deliberately, face down on the concrete floor. The client in the cashmere coat said nothing. He looked at the window. Blake's voice was soft, almost gentle, the kind of gentle that cuts deeper than shouting. "Sweetheart, I don't know what they teach you people over in that neighborhood, but in this building, black girls who mop floors don't touch things that belong to paying customers. You understand me? Now pick that up and go find your mama." Zara bent down and picked up every page. She didn't say a word, but her eyes never left the Ferrari in the corner. The red one. The broken one that had defeated every expert in the country for 2 years. She already knew what was wrong with it. Stay with this story, because 30 minutes from now, that same girl is going to stand in front of 14 certified mechanics, 2 Ferrari executives, and a journalist with a notepad. And she is going to say 6 words that make every single one of them go completely silent. Drop your location and local time in the comments right now. We want to know where in the world you're watching this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, stay till the end. You'll want to. Clifford Hargrove had built his fortune the hard way, not the Silicon Valley way. No algorithms, no venture capital, no 22-year-old in a hoodie disrupting an industry from a rented garage in Palo Alto. Clifford built his money the old way, with cargo ships and cold mornings on the Baltimore docks, and contracts signed on handshakes before lawyers got involved. He started with 1 vessel, a second-hand bulk carrier he bought at auction in 1979 with borrowed money and a handshake loan from his father-in-law. He named it the Sophie, after the woman who had agreed to marry him 3 weeks earlier, despite the fact that he owned nothing but the suit he proposed in. By 2003, Hargrove Maritime operated 41 vessels across 4 continents. By 2015, the company was valued at $4.2 billion. By the time Clifford sold his majority stake and retired to a 14-room estate in Marin County, California, his name was on buildings at 2 universities and a pediatric wing at UCSF Medical Center. None of that mattered now. He was 71 years old, and he rattled around that 14-room house like a single coin in an empty jar. His daughter lived in Boston. His son-in-law called once a month, usually about the estate. His assistant scheduled his meals. His housekeeper, a quiet, dignified woman named Zara Mitchell, kept the rooms from collecting too much dust. The only room that felt like anything was the garage. Specifically, the space occupied by a 1964 Ferrari 250 GT Lusso, Berlinetta body, Pininfarina design. Rosso Corsa paint that had deepened over 6 decades into something richer than red, something closer to the color of old wine held up to candlelight. Chrome details. A V12 engine that, when it ran correctly, produced a sound that Clifford could only describe as civilized thunder. Sophie had bought it. That was the part people never believed. In 1964, a 26-year-old black woman from Baltimore had saved, in secret, over 3 years, squirreling away money from her nursing salary and a small inheritance from her grandmother, enough to purchase a Ferrari. She had arranged everything through a dealer in New York, had the car transported to San Francisco, where they were living at the time. She presented the keys at their wedding reception, stood up in front of 60 guests, tapped her champagne glass, and said, "Clifford always said he needed somewhere beautiful to go when the world gets too loud. So now he has one." The guests laughed. Clifford had cried. He was not a man who cried easily. They drove that car up the California coast on their honeymoon. Sophie in the passenger seat with her feet on the dashboard, and her head tipped back, and her laugh rising above the engine noise. He could still hear it. Even now. Especially now. Sophie died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Quick, in the brutal way that almost felt merciful, except that it wasn't, because mercy would have given him time to prepare. And there was no preparing for the specific silence that a house produces when the person who filled it is gone. The Ferrari sat in this garage. Clifford visited it every morning. Not to drive it, just to sit in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, with his hands on the wheel and the engine off and the garage quiet. It was the closest thing he had to a conversation with her. Then the shudder started. It was subtle at first. A tremor at highway speed, not violent, not dangerous, just present. A vibration that moved through the steering column into his palms. Intermittent. Some days nothing. Other days above 65 miles per hour, the car would tremble with a low, irregular frequency that felt almost like grief. Clifford noticed it immediately. He knew this car the way he had known Sophie's voice. Every register, every tone, every silence between notes. Something was wrong. He brought it to Sutton Elite Motorworks in San Francisco's Pacific Heights neighborhood. Blake Sutton ran the operation. Third-generation money, an Ivy League business degree, walls covered in photographs of celebrity clients and vintage trophies. The shop occupied a restored warehouse on Fillmore Street, and its waiting room had better furniture than most people's living rooms. Blake examined the car personally, walked around it slowly, crouched, stood, nodded with the gravity of a surgeon reviewing scans. 3 weeks later, the diagnosis. Drive shaft harmonic imbalance, comprehensive correction. The bill came to $44,000. Clifford paid it without blinking. He drove the car home on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The Pacific Coast Highway was quiet. The engine sang. No tremor, no shudder. He rolled the window down and let the air in and thought, "There you are, Sophie. There you are." 6 weeks later, the shudder came back. It was worse this time. Not dramatically, just measurably. A half-degree deeper in the vibration. A slightly lower frequency. As if whatever was wrong had been briefly interrupted, but not resolved. As if the car had been silenced rather than heard. Clifford sat in the garage that evening with his hands in his lap and the overhead light humming and the silence pressing in from all sides. He picked up the phone and called Blake Sutton. "It's back," he said, a pause on the other end. Then Blake's smooth, practiced voice. "Mr. Hargrove, these vintage systems can be complex. Why don't you bring her back in and we'll take another look?" Clifford stared at the car for a long time after he hung up. He should have heard the warning in that pause. The fraction of a second where confidence became performance. He didn't. Not yet. The second bill came to $38,000. Ignition timing recalibration. Fuel delivery system inspection. Throttle linkage adjustment. Blake presented the invoice with the same steady confidence, the same measured explanation, the same implicit promise folded into every sentence. "We know what we're doing, and now it's done." It wasn't done. 8 weeks after the second visit, on a gray February morning on the Golden Gate Bridge, the Ferrari shuddered so violently that Clifford pulled to the shoulder and sat with his hazard lights blinking for 11 minutes before he trusted himself to drive again. An elderly couple slowed down and asked if he needed help. He thanked them and said no. He called Blake from the car. This time the pause was longer. Over the next 24 months, Clifford Hargrove took his Ferrari to 5 different specialists. The progression was its own kind of education in how expertise can become theater when the answer refuses to cooperate. Back to Sutton a second time. $91,000. New driveshaft components, bearing replacements, a full undercarriage inspection that Blake described as the most comprehensive evaluation this vehicle has ever received. The shutter returned in 6 weeks. A specialist in Greenwich, Connecticut, a man who had spent 40 years restoring post-war European automobiles and whose waiting list ran 18 months. He kept the car for 3 weeks, charged $175,000, and returned it with a detailed report that used the phrase "within acceptable parameters" 4 times. The parameters were not acceptable. The shutter came back on the drive to the airport. Then Maranello. Clifford flew to Italy and stood in the Ferrari factory where this car had been built 60 years earlier. Technicians in white coats examined every component with instruments that cost more than most people's homes. They found nothing conclusive. They charged $310,000 and suggested that some vibration in a vehicle of this age was perhaps characteristic. Clifford flew home with the car in a climate-controlled freight container and the word "characteristic" sitting in his chest like a stone. The restoration house in Stuttgart added another $280,000 to the total. By this point, Clifford had spent $2.1 million across 4 shops and 2 continents and 24 months, and the Ferrari still trembled above 65 miles per hour, like a man trying not to weep. He stopped driving it on highways, restricted himself to surface streets, slow speeds, the careful management of a problem that nobody could solve. Every morning he still sat in the driver's seat for his 10 minutes. But now there was something different in the ritual. A helplessness underneath the grief, a new layer of loss. It was during the 3rd visit to Sutton, Blake's 4th attempt at the same car, the same problem, the same confident presentation of a new theory, that Zara Mitchell was mopping the reception floor. She came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, had cleaned for Sutton Elite Motorworks for 7 years, working the early morning shift before her second job at the Hargrove estate in the afternoons. She was efficient and quiet and almost entirely invisible to the people who moved through that space. On this particular Tuesday, Zara was with her. School was out for a teacher development day, and the after-school program didn't open until noon. Donna had nowhere to put her daughter, so Zara sat in the corner of the reception area with a geometry textbook and a mechanical pencil, and the particular stillness of a child who has learned that the best way to exist in spaces where you are tolerated rather than welcomed is to take up as little room as possible. Blake Sutton emerged from the service bay with a client, a woman in her 60s, pearl earrings, a Birkin bag in a color that had a name Donna didn't know. They were discussing the woman's Aston Martin. The woman was laughing at something Blake had said. Blake glanced at Donna without slowing his stride. "Can you get the reception floor again? There are marks near the door. Not her name. Not a please." The woman with the Birkin bag glanced at Donna briefly, the way you glance at furniture, and smiled at something Blake said next. "Of course," Donna said. Zara's pencil stopped moving. She watched her mother wring out the mop with the particular efficiency of someone who has performed a task so many thousands of times that the body does it independent of the mind. She watched the way her mother's shoulders carried themselves, slightly forward, slightly small, a posture so practiced it had become permanent. She had seen her mother disappear in rooms like this her entire life, made invisible by people who had never once thought to ask her name. The pencil snapped. Clean break, right at the middle. Zara looked down at the two pieces in her hand. Then she looked up at the service bay door, the one with the small rectangular window that showed, if you were at the right angle, the rear end of a red Ferrari on a hydraulic lift. In the service bay, Blake was explaining his new theory to Clifford Hargrove. Something about the differential mounts. Something about stress fractures in the subframe. His voice had the cadence of a man who had given this speech many times. Confident, technical, rich with terminology that was designed to make the listener feel they were in the presence of superior knowledge. Clifford stood beside his car with the expression of a man who has stopped believing but cannot afford to stop trying. "I've heard this before," Clifford said quietly. "Different words, same speech." Blake's smile didn't waver. "Mr. Hargrove, I assure you, I know what you assure me." Clifford touched the car's roof with 2 fingers, gently, the way you touch something you're afraid of losing. "I'm putting her in storage. I can't keep doing this." In the corner of the reception area, Zara Mitchell set down her broken pencil and stood up. 6 years earlier, on a Thursday evening in January, the boiler in their apartment building died. It went out somewhere between 9 and 10 at night. Zara remembered because she had been doing homework at the kitchen table when the radiator stopped clicking, and by the time she noticed, the apartment had already started its slow surrender to the cold coming through the walls. She was 9 years old. Donna called the landlord. He didn't answer. She called again at 10 and again at 11 and left a message that was careful and polite in the way that people who cannot afford to be dismissed are always careful and polite. The building had 14 units. Several of them had children. By midnight, the temperature inside the apartments had dropped to 52 degrees. 3 families on the upper floors had gathered in the hallway in coats. The landlord called back the next morning. He said he'd have someone look at it by the end of the week. Donna sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her and said nothing for a long time. Zara said, "Mama, can I look at it?" Donna looked at her daughter. "Baby, you're 9 years old." "I know. Can I look at it?" Zara had found a discarded boiler repair manual in the recycling room 2 months earlier. She had taken it because it had diagrams, and she liked diagrams. The way they reduced complicated things to their essential relationships, line by line, part by part. She had read it the way other children read comic books. She had also watched, over the previous month, approximately 11 hours of boiler repair tutorials on her mother's phone. Donna had nothing left to lose. She took Zara to the basement. The boiler room was low-ceilinged and smelled like rust and old water. The unit itself was a 1987 Weil-McLean cast-iron system, large as a refrigerator, covered in pipe connections and gauges and valves that arranged themselves in a logic Zara had to stand still for a minute to read. She read it. Then she traced the pilot assembly line with one finger, cross-referencing what she felt with what the manual had shown her. Her hands were small. They fit into the access panel easily, past the burner housing, to the thermocouple connection at the back where, if you knew what you were looking for, you could feel the loose contact before you could see it. A bobby pin, a 2-inch length of electrical tape from the supply closet upstairs. 40 minutes after she went down, the heat came back on. The families in the hallway went quiet. Then one of them started laughing. Then another. A woman from the 4th floor brought Zara a plate of rice and beans wrapped in foil and said something in Spanish that Donna translated later as, "God sent this child." Donna held her daughter in the boiler room and didn't say anything for a while. Across the street, on the ground floor of the building facing theirs, an old man had been watching through his window. He came over the next morning. Lou Caruso was 71 years old, white-haired, deliberate in his movements, with hands that were disproportionately large, wide-palmed, thick-fingered, the hands of someone who had spent decades in physical negotiation with metal and heat. He had lived in that building for 4 years. He was polite to his neighbors and kept to himself, and had not, in 4 years, initiated a conversation with anyone. He knocked on Donna's door at 8 in the morning and introduced himself and asked if he could speak with the girl. Donna stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "Why?" she said. Lou considered the question seriously. "Because I watched her fix that boiler last night, and I want to know if she understood what she was doing, or if she got lucky." Donna looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and let him in. Zara was at the kitchen table with the manual open in front of her, annotating the margins with a red pen. Lou sat down across from her. He looked at the manual. He looked at the annotations. He looked at her. "You fixed that yourself?" he said. "No help?" "YouTube," Zara said. "And the manual." "How did you know it was the thermocouple?" "The pilot light was on, but the burner wasn't firing. That means the signal wasn't getting through. The thermocouple is what sends the signal. So I checked the connection." Lou was quiet for a moment. "You didn't fix that boiler," he said finally. "You heard it. There's a difference." Zara looked up from the manual. Lou stood, slowly, and put on his coat. "Come with me. I want to show you something." The storage unit was in the basement of his building. A 12 by 15 space that smelled like motor oil and decades, and something else underneath. Something older. Tool chests organized with a precision that suggested military training or a very particular kind of grief. Shelves of parts labeled in Italian. Photographs covering an entire wall. Zara stood in the entrance and looked at the photographs. A younger version of Lou, dark-haired, smiling, standing next to a racing car with a number on the door. Lou shaking hands with a man in a suit outside a factory. Lou beside an engine block the size of a dining table, surrounded by men in white coats, and in the center of the wall, framed separately from the others, Lou and an older man in a dark jacket, standing in front of the building that said Scuderia Ferrari above the door. "Is that—" Zara began. "Yes," Lou said. "That's Enzo." He walked to the center of the storage unit, to a workbench covered in a canvas tarp. He pulled the tarp back. Underneath, a partially disassembled V12 engine. 12 cylinders arranged in 2 banks. Manifolds and carburetors and timing chains laid out around it, with the care of surgical instruments. Lou reached beneath the workbench and produced a mechanical stethoscope. A simple device. Metal probe, rubber tubing, earpieces. He held it out to Zara. "Put the probe on the engine block," he said. "Tell me what you hear." Zara took the stethoscope. Her hands were steady. She had no idea that this moment, this basement, this engine, this old man with his enormous hands and his careful eyes was going to change the entire direction of her life. She placed the probe on the cold metal and listened. Lou Caruso had trained over 80 mechanics in his career, factory technicians at Maranello, racing engineers for 2 Formula 2 teams, a handful of private restoration specialists who now ran their own shops in Milan and Munich, and one in Buenos Aires. Men with university degrees and professional certifications and decades of accumulated experience. He had never trained anyone the way he trained Zara Mitchell. With the others, Lou had started with theory, specifications, tolerances, the technical language of the craft. He gave them manuals and diagrams and expected them to build their knowledge from the ground up, the way a house is built. Foundation first, then walls, then roof. With Zara, he started with silence. The first 6 months, he never let her touch a tool. She came every Saturday morning at 7, and Lou would start an engine, sometimes the disassembled V12, Sometimes an old Alfa Romeo he kept in varying states of repair. Sometimes a small block American engine he had acquired specifically for this purpose. And he would say one thing: listen. Not listen for anything specific. Not listen for the timing or the fuel mixture or the bearing wear. Just listen, the way you listen to a piece of music before you understand music theory. Before the vocabulary arrives and starts organizing everything into categories. Before knowledge becomes a filter. Just hear it. Zara was extraordinarily good at this. Lou recognized it this first morning. Watching her stand beside the running engine, with her eyes closed and her head tilted at the slight angle he associated with genuine attention rather than performed concentration. Most students, when you told them to listen, would listen for something, would immediately begin filtering the sound through their existing expectations, looking for problems, looking for patterns they recognized. Zara listened the way water fills a container, completely, without preference. After 6 months, Lou gave her the mechanical stethoscope. He showed her how to place the probe at different points on the engine block, the valve cover, the oil pan, the intake manifold, and how each location produced a different conversation. The engine was not one sound. It was dozens of sounds layered on top of each other, and the stethoscope was a way of separating the layers, of isolating one voice in a choir. Zara took to it the way some children take to music by ear, naturally, without visible effort. In the second year, Lou introduced blindfold diagnostics. He would deliberately introduce a fault into an engine, a loose valve, a misfiring cylinder, a fuel delivery restriction, and Zara would stand before the running engine with a cloth tied over her eyes and her stethoscope in hand and her palm flat against the engine block. Tell me what's wrong. At age 11, she could identify 4 of the 6 faults Lou introduced within 4 minutes. At 12, she was getting 5. At 13, she got all 6, and identified the 6th fault in under 90 seconds. Lou sat down on his stool and did not say anything for a long moment. He was thinking about Marcus. His son had been gifted too, not in the same way, but with the same quality of attention, the same willingness to be patient when patience was what the situation required. Marcus had worked on cars with Lou every summer until he was 17. Then the streets offered something faster than patience, and Marcus had gone toward it, and Lou had not known how to stop him. And by the time the overdose happened, Marcus was 26 years old, and Lou was 67, and nothing in 34 years at the Ferrari factory had prepared him for the specific way a father's hands become useless at the moment they are needed most. He had moved to San Francisco to be near Marcus's grave. That was the truth he didn't tell people. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand before Zara could see. Again, he said. In the 3rd year, Lou taught her about materials, how rubber ages, how metal fatigues, how heat and cold and time work on components in ways that no visual inspection can reveal, because the damage happens inside, invisible, accumulating over decades until the moment it becomes audible. And by then, if you haven't been trained to hear it, you will look at the outside of the component and see nothing wrong. He used an old Alfa Romeo for this lesson, a 1963 Giulia Spider with a shutter problem that had defeated 3 mechanics over a period of 8 months. He pointed to the drive shaft, to the rear flange where the shaft connected to the differential. Look at it, he said. What do you see? Nothing, Zara said. It looks fine. It is fine, visually. Now start the engine and put your hand on the differential housing. Don't press hard. Just rest. She did. At 3,200 revolutions per minute, she felt it. A lateral oscillation so small it was nearly nothing. A tremor, a hesitation in the rotation, a microscopic deviation from true that the engine then had to compensate for at every subsequent revolution. "There," she said. "The flange has a hairline deformation," Lou said. "Probably from a curb strike 20 years ago. The metal looks perfect. The geometry is almost perfect. But almost is not the same as perfect. And at a specific RPM, the deviation becomes a resonance frequency, and that frequency is what you felt." He replaced the flange. Total cost, $60 and 40 minutes. "The three mechanics who couldn't find it," Zara said. "What did they do wrong?" Lou considered the question carefully. "They trusted what they could see, and they trusted their instruments. And their instruments said, within tolerance." He set down his wrench. Tolerance is a range. The problem lived inside the range. The instruments couldn't hear it, but your hand could. Zara filed that lesson away. She filed it in the place in her mind where she kept things she didn't yet understand the full use of. She would understand it in 2 years. Now, at 15, she closed her geometry textbook in the reception area of Sutton Elite Motor Works, set down the 2 pieces of her broken pencil, and stood up. Through the rectangular window in the service bay door, the red Ferrari sat on its lift, trembling in its own private silence. She had been listening to it for 20 minutes. She already knew the service bay door opened with a sound like an exhale. 14 technicians, a hydraulic lift, fluorescent lights that turned everything the color of honesty, the Ferrari on the lift, its undercarriage exposed, cables and brake lines and the drive shaft running the length of its belly like a spine. Zara walked in and stood 12 feet from the car. Nobody noticed her immediately. Tyler Crane, lead technician, 14 years at Sutton, the kind of competence that had calcified somewhere around year 8 into something closer to habit, was leaning against the workbench explaining to a junior technician why the latest diagnostic readout was inconclusive. 3 other technicians were clustered near the lift. 2 more at the far wall, all of them in Sutton's gray uniform shirts with their names embroidered over the breast pocket in white thread. Clifford Hargrove stood beside his car with his coat on, hands in his pockets, watching Blake Sutton explain the new theory about differential mount stress fractures. Blake was mid-sentence when he saw Zara. He stopped, turned. The same slow turn as before, the same top-to-bottom assessment. Except this time there was no client beside him to perform for, just his technicians, and Clifford, and the car. "How did you get in here?" "The door," Zara said. Someone laughed. It was short, quickly suppressed. Blake's jaw tightened. "This is a restricted area. Where is your mother?" "Reception." Zara's eyes moved to the Ferrari, to the drive shaft, to the rear flange where the shaft met the differential housing. She had seen it through the window for 20 minutes. She had heard the engine running during the diagnostic. She had felt, in the way Lou had taught her to feel things from a distance, through vibration in the floor, through the particular quality of the sound bouncing off concrete walls, the specific frequency of the problem. She looked at Blake Sutton. "I know what's wrong with the car." The room went still in the way rooms go still when something unexpected has been introduced into a space that considered itself closed. Then Tyler Crane laughed, full-throated, genuine, the laugh of a man who found something genuinely funny rather than merely uncomfortable. 2 technicians near the lift joined him. One shook his head. Blake Sutton's expression moved through several stages in rapid succession. Surprise, irritation, and then something that settled into a particular coldness. He walked to the service bay entrance and called into the reception area. "Donna, I need you in here." Zara Mitchell appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, mop still in her hand, reading the room in the way she had spent 20 years learning to read rooms. quickly, accurately, with the particular alertness of someone who knows that the temperature of a space can change without warning. She saw Zara standing alone in the center of the service bay. She saw Blake Sutton's face. Her stomach dropped. Zara. Her voice was low, urgent. Come here, baby. Right now. Zara didn't move. Blake turned to a journalist who happened to be present, a man named Greg Sato from Auto Heritage Quarterly, who had been waiting in reception to interview Blake about the shop's recent award and had followed the commotion to the service bay door. Blake turned to him with the deliberate awareness of a man who understood that an audience changed the nature of a performance. His voice was loud enough to carry. This is what happens when people who can't afford the front door start wandering in through the back. He looked at Zara, not with anger, with something worse, with the patient condescension of someone who has never once considered that they might be wrong. Sweetheart, does your school even have an auto shop class? Or is that too advanced for where you come from? Greg Sato's pen moved across his notepad. Donna Mitchell's knees buckled slightly. She steadied herself against the doorframe. Her hand, the one not holding the mop, pressed flat against the wall. Zara looked at her mother. She looked at her mother's hands, the mop handle, the cracked knuckles, the skin that had dried and split and healed and dried again through 20 years of cleaning other people's spaces. She looked at the slight forward curve of her mother's shoulders, the posture that rooms like this had installed in her body over decades. She looked at her mother's face, the fear there, yes, but underneath the fear, something older. A tiredness. The specific exhaustion of a woman who has spent a lifetime making herself small enough to be permitted in spaces that were never designed to include her. Something settled in Zara's chest. Not anger. Anger was too hot for what this was. This was something colder and more certain. She turned back to Blake Sutton. I know what's wrong with the car, she said again. Same words, same tone, as if he hadn't spoken. Clifford Hargrove, who had been standing beside his Ferrari in silence through all of this, raised one hand. Let her speak. Blake turned. Clifford, this is completely... Let her speak. The room rearranged itself around those 3 words. Blake's face went through its stages again, faster this time. He looked at the journalist. He looked at his technicians. He looked at the 15-year-old girl in worn sneakers standing in the middle of his service bay, with her chin level and her eyes steady. He made a decision. The wrong one, as it turned out. But it looked, in the moment, like the right one. Fine. His voice was controlled, smooth. If Mr. Hargrove wants to entertain this, we'll do it properly. He looked at Zara with a smile that didn't involve his eyes. I'll bring in Ferrari Heritage, the certification board, journalists. You'll have 90 minutes in front of qualified witnesses. The smile sharpened. When you fail, and you will fail, it will be on the record. Permanently. He waited until the journalists had gone back to reception. Then he stepped close to Donna Mitchell. His voice dropped to a register that only she could hear. If your daughter embarrasses this shop, you will not find cleaning work in this city again. I will make certain of it. Do you understand me? Donna's face went gray. Before she could respond, Zara spoke. Mama. Donna looked at her daughter. I can do this, Zara said. I know I can. Donna Mitchell stood in the doorway of a service bay that had never once been designed to include her. She thought about every room she had made herself small in, every name she had not been called, every time she had told her daughter, stay quiet, stay small, stay safe. She straightened her spine. My daughter doesn't say things she doesn't mean, Mr. Sutton. Her voice was quiet. absolute. If she says she knows, she knows. 7 days. Blake Sutton called 3 journalists before dinner. He wanted witnesses. He wanted documentation. He wanted this to be permanent. He had no idea what he was building a stage for. Blake Sutton spent 7 days preparing for a humiliation. He arranged the service bay with the care of someone staging a courtroom. Folding chairs in 4 rows facing the Ferrari, which sat on the hydraulic lift under lights so bright they eliminated every shadow. A digital countdown clock mounted on the far wall, its red numerals large enough to be read from the back row. A table at the front with water glasses and legal pads, for the panel, not for Zara, name cards on every chair. Blake had printed them himself, on heavy cardstock, in the same font used on Sutton's letterhead. R. Fontaine, Ferrari Heritage Division. H. Weston, Automotive Certification Board. G. Sato, Auto Heritage Quarterly. 14 technician name cards in the 2 front rows. 2 more journalists Blake had called personally. There was no name card for Zara Mitchell. There was no name card for Donna Mitchell either, but that was simply because it hadn't occurred to him that she would come. She came. She sat in the last row against the wall in her church clothes, a navy dress she wore to important occasions, and a pair of low heels that she had resoled twice because she couldn't afford new ones. She held her purse in her lap with both hands, and her lips moved slightly, the way they moved when she was praying or counting, and it was impossible to tell which. Zara arrived in her best clothes too. A white button-down shirt that Donna had pressed twice, dark slacks, her good shoes, which were also her only shoes, which were beginning to separate at the left sole, and which she had fixed that morning with a thin line of superglue. She walked into the service bay and looked at the rows of chairs. She saw the name cards. She saw that there was none for her. She stood. She would stand for the entire 90 minutes. She never asked for a chair. She never looked at Blake to see if he noticed. The room filled. Renee Fontaine from Ferrari Heritage arrived first. Blonde hair pulled back, a gray suit, 23 years in the industry written in the particular efficiency of her movements. She had flown in from New York. She sat, opened her portfolio, and began reviewing notes. She had seen overconfident amateurs before. She expected another one today. Judge Harold Weston arrived 4 minutes later, visibly irritated, checking his watch before he had fully sat down. He was a large man with the bearing of someone accustomed to having his time treated as more valuable than other people's. He checked his watch a second time. The 14 Sutton technicians filled the front 2 rows. Tyler Crane sat in the aisle seat of the first row with his arms crossed and his legs extended. The body language of a man who had already decided the outcome and was here purely for the entertainment of watching the conclusion arrive. Several technicians were talking quietly. A few were smiling. Greg Sato and 2 other journalists sat in the 3rd row, with notepads and phones face up on their knees. Then, just as Blake was moving to the front to begin, the young journalist, the one from Auto Heritage Quarterly, the one who had been in reception the week before when Blake made his remark, stood up. He walked to the back row and set his folding chair down next to Donna Mitchell. "There's plenty of room up front," he said to her. "But I thought you might want company back here." Donna looked at him. Something moved across her face that she controlled before it became visible. "Thank you," she said quietly. Blake Sutton watched this from the front of the room. "Sato," his voice was level. "You're here as press, not as a social worker." Greg Sato looked at him, wrote something in his notepad, did not move his chair. Blake began. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. We're here to evaluate a claim made by a young person regarding a diagnostic matter that has, I'll acknowledge, proven complex." He let the word young person do its work. The subject will have 90 minutes. She must identify the fault, explain her reasoning, and propose a solution. Standard protocol. He paused. Before we begin, I'd like to establish baseline competency. A few technical questions, just to ensure we're working with someone who has at minimum a foundational understanding of the vehicle in question. He turned to Zara with a smile that the front rows couldn't see the back of. Miss Mitchell, what is the bore and stroke specification for the Colombo 512 engine as fitted to the 250 GT Lusso? 73 by 58.8 millimeters, Zara said. Total displacement 2,953 cubic centimeters. A beat. The ignition timing at idle. 8 degrees before top dead center. Adjustable based on fuel octane. Torque specification for the cylinder head bolts. First pass, 22 foot-pounds. Second pass, 45. Final pass, 63. Spiral pattern from center outward. The room shifted. Not dramatically, just a degree or two. The way a room shifts when something unexpected has been introduced and people are recalibrating without admitting that they're recalibrating. Tyler Crane uncrossed his arms. Blake fired more questions. Carburetor float height. Valve clearance cold versus hot. Distributor firing order. Fuel pressure specification at idle. The compression ratio. Zara answered every one, without pause, without notes, without looking at anything except Blake Sutton's face. Tyler Crane was doing something he hadn't done in years. He was doing arithmetic in his head, running through the questions, checking the answers against his own knowledge, the knowledge he had accumulated across 14 years and 3 Ferrari certifications. She was correct on every answer, all of them, without hesitation. He had gotten 2 wrong himself mentally before he caught them. Renee Fontaine set down her pen. She looked at Zara with an expression that was not yet respect. She was too careful for that, but with something adjacent to it. Attention. Real attention. The kind that arrives when something has surprised you into paying it. Mr. Sutton. Her voice was precise. I believe we've established sufficient theoretical competency. Perhaps we should allow her to actually examine the vehicle. Blake's mouth opened, closed. Fine, he said. The clock starts now. The digital display on the wall blinked to life. 90 minutes. 89 minutes, 59 seconds. 89 minutes, 58 seconds. Zara turned toward the Ferrari, and then the side door of the service bay opened, and an old man walked in with a wooden cane, and the room changed again. Lou Caruso moved slowly. That was the first thing the room noticed. Not his face, not his age, not the wooden cane that took his weight with each step. The slowness. The deliberate, unhurried quality of a man who had stopped performing urgency decades ago because he no longer needed to. He wore a plain, dark jacket and a collared shirt buttoned to the top. His white hair was combed. His hands, those disproportionately large, wide-palmed hands, were relaxed at his sides except for the one that held the cane. He walked to the center of the service bay and stopped. The older technicians recognized him first. A man named Vic, 17 years in the industry, went very still in his chair. Another, a restoration specialist named Paul, who had trained in Europe, leaned forward and said something under his breath that the people beside him couldn't catch. Renee Fontaine rose from her chair so quickly it scraped the concrete. Lou Caruso. Her voice carried something that wasn't quite professional composure. You're Lou Caruso, from the Scuderia factory team. Lou looked at her. I was, he said, a long time ago. The room rearranged itself the way rooms do when a known quantity enters and recalibrates everyone's sense of scale. Tyler Crane sat up straighter. Judge Weston stopped checking his watch. Blake Sutton's color changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Lou walked to the center of the bay, stopping beside Zara. He placed one hand on her shoulder, briefly, the way you touch something you are proud of, without wanting to make a production of it. He faced the room. "This young woman has been my student for 6 years," he said. His voice was quiet and carried perfectly. "In my career, I have trained more than 80 mechanics, factory technicians, racing engineers, men with advanced degrees and decades of experience." He paused. "I have never trained anyone with her ability to hear what an engine is telling you." He looked directly at Blake Sutton. "If she says she knows what is wrong with this car, then she knows." He walked to the back row. He sat down beside Zara Mitchell. He looked at her once, briefly, and gave a small nod. She pressed her lips together and nodded back. "This is highly irregular," Blake said. His voice had lost some of its smoothness. "Outside parties were not part of the agreed. Lou Caruso can sit wherever he likes in my service bay." Clifford Hargrove's voice came from beside the car, quiet and final. "Continue." The clock read 84:32. Zara turned to the Ferrari. She did not reach for tools. She did not open a diagnostic case or connect a scanner or consult a laptop. She walked around the car slowly, once, twice, with her hands at her sides and her eyes moving over the undercarriage with the particular focus of someone reading a text they have been preparing to read for a long time. She crouched at the rear, stood, crouched again. Tyler Crane shifted in his seat. "What exactly is she doing?" "Looking," someone said. "She's been looking for 4 minutes." Zara stood and faced Tyler directly. "You've been looking at this car for 2 years, she said. Her voice was even. "I've been listening to it for 20 minutes. We'll see which one of us was paying attention." The front row went quiet. "Please start the engine," Zara said. A technician turned the key. The V12 came to life. 12 cylinders, the sound filling the service bay with a layered complexity that most people in the room experienced simply as beautiful, powerful and precise and civilized. Zara closed her eyes. She stood 3 feet from the car with her palms facing downward, not touching anything, and she was still in the absolute way Lou had taught her. Not the stillness of someone waiting, but the stillness of someone receiving. 15 seconds, 20, 30. At 3,200 revolutions per minute, her right index finger extended. There. Nobody else had heard anything. The engine sounded identical to the moment before. Smooth, even, perfectly composed. "Heard what?" Tyler said. His voice had lost its mockery. What replaced it was something more unsettling. Genuine confusion. Renee Fontaine leaned forward. "Can you describe it?" "A lateral oscillation," Zara said. "Rear drive shaft, at the differential flange. It's not in the sound of the engine. It's underneath it. A resonance frequency that only appears at a specific RPM band. You can't hear it as a discrete sound. You feel it as an absence of smoothness." She turned to the workbench. "I need a strobe timing light and a mechanical dial indicator. Analog, not digital." Blake looked at his technicians. Tyler stood slowly, went to the tool storage, returned with both instruments. He set them on the workbench beside Zara without comment. Zara attached the dial indicator to the differential housing with a magnetic base, positioning the probe against the rear flange of the drive shaft. She held the strobe light in her other hand. "Bring it to 3,200 revolutions per minute and hold it there." The engine climbed, held. The dial indicator needle moved. Not dramatically. A deviation of less than 0.5 millimeter, lateral, rhythmic, occurring at every revolution of the shaft. Renee Fontaine was on her feet. "That's a runout," she said. "A lateral runout on the flange. Hairline deformation," Zara said. "Probably from impact. A curb strike, maybe a loading incident, sometime in the last 30 years. The metal looks perfect visually. The deviation is within standard measurement tolerance, which is why every diagnostic missed it." She set down the strobe. "But tolerance is a range. The problem lives inside the range. At 3,200 revolutions per minute, the deviation creates a resonance frequency that transmits through the drive shaft, through the chassis, into the steering column." She looked at Clifford. "That's what you've been feeling." Clifford Hargrove had not moved. "The fix," Zara continued, "is a flange replacement, standard component, available through any Ferrari heritage parts supplier." She paused. "Approximately $60. Installation, 40 minutes. She let that number sit in the room. "I can demonstrate the diagnosis with a temporary shim. If I shim the flange to correct the runout, the vibration will disappear completely. Remove the shim, it returns. That's the proof." Blake opened his mouth. Clifford raised his hand. "Do it," he said. 8 minutes. Zara's hands moved with the confidence of someone performing a task they have rehearsed hundreds of times in a basement storage unit in Oakland. The shim went in clean. The connections were checked. The probe repositioned. "Start the engine." The V12 rose to 3,200 revolutions per minute. The dial indicator needle was perfectly still. They held it for 20 minutes. 25. 30. The needle did not move. The resonance was gone. The engine ran with a smoothness that felt, to everyone in the room, like something being restored rather than simply corrected. Zara removed the shim. Again. At 3,200 revolutions per minute, the needle moved. The deviation returned, precise and predictable, exactly as she had described. She shut it down. She turned to face the room. A 15-year-old girl in super-glued shoes, standing in a service bay full of experts who had flown in from 3 cities to watch her fail. "A $60 flange," she said. "After 2.1 million. The room did not breathe. Clifford Hargrove stood beside his car and did not speak for a long time. The room around him was beginning to find its voice again. Renee Fontaine writing rapidly in her portfolio. Judge Weston leaning over to speak quietly with the technician beside him. Greg Sato filling an entire page of his notepad. The journalists were talking to each other in low tones. Tyler Crane was staring at the dial indicator as if it had said something he needed to hear again to believe. Blake Sutton had not moved from his position at the side of the room. His color had not returned. Clifford was looking at the Ferrari. He was looking at it the way he looked at it every morning in the garage, with the particular attention of a man in conversation with an absence. His hands were in his coat pockets. His jaw was set. "I need to drive it," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the room heard it. Blake stepped forward immediately. "Clifford, the shim is a temporary measure. We haven't done the actual repair yet, and without a full safety review after any modification, the liability exposure alone—" "Blake." One word. The kind of one word that ends conversations. Clifford turned to Zara. "Will you come with me?" Blake made a sound. It was not quite a word. It was the sound a man makes when his authority is being removed in front of an audience and he has not yet found the right language to stop it. "She's 15 years old. The insurance implications of a minor in a vehicle of this value without parental—" "Donna." Clifford looked to the back row. "Do I have your permission to take your daughter for a drive?" Donna Mitchell looked at her daughter. Then she looked at Clifford Hargrove, really looked at him, the way she had looked at him across the rooms of his estate for 3 years, the quiet man who said please and thank you, and had never once in 3 years called her the help. "Yes," she said, "you do." The Ferrari's door opened with the sound Lou had always described as a whispered promise, the soft, precise click of Italian engineering from an era when door mechanisms were designed by hand. Clifford lowered himself into the driver's seat. The leather was worn to the precise shape of decades of use. His father-in-law's dimensions, then his own, then Sophie's on the days she drove, then his again after. A seat that carried the compression of specific human histories. Zara got in the passenger side. The interior smelled like aged leather and the particular dryness of a car that is loved and cared for. The dashboard was simple. Gauges, a thin-rimmed steering wheel, a gear shift that came up from the floor at a slight angle. No screens, no modern additions. Nothing that hadn't been there in 1964. Clifford turned the key. The V12 came to life with a sound that was different inside the car than it was in the service bay. More intimate, more present. Like the difference between hearing music in a concert hall and hearing it in a small room. The vibration of the engine moved through the seat and the floor and the steering wheel into Clifford's hands. He held still for a moment, listening. Then he put it in gear and drove out of Sutton Elite Motorworks into the San Francisco afternoon. He took Highway 101 north, the same route he had taken a dozen times in the 2 years of the problem. The same grades, the same stretches of open road, the same conditions that had produced the shudder every time before. They drove in silence for a while. The city gave way to the bridge, and the bridge gave way to Marin, and the road opened up with the particular quality that California roads have in the late afternoon when the light comes low and gold from the west. At 65 miles per hour, Clifford's hands tightened on the wheel. Force of habit. The body remembering what the mind was trying to forget. The hundreds of times the tremor had begun at exactly this speed, on exactly this road, the way grief can become conditioned into physical expectation. The car ran smooth, at 70, at 75. The engine held its note, clean and even, no deviation in the column, no shudder through the chassis, no trembling in the seat. Clifford's hands loosened. He exhaled, a long, slow release that had been waiting somewhere in his chest for 2 years. "She was saving for 3 years before she told me," he said. Zara looked at him. Sophie. She put aside money every month, from her nursing salary, from a small inheritance from her grandmother. I had no idea. She was 23 when she started saving, 26 when she bought it. He kept his eyes on the road. She presented the keys at our wedding in 1963, a small smile, stood up in front of 60 people and said, "Now you have somewhere beautiful to go when the world gets too loud." Zara listened. She was the only person I've ever known who understood that some things can't be explained. They can only be felt. He was quiet for a moment. This car, the sound of the engine, the way it moves. She understood that those things were a language, that I needed that language. They reached the stretch of 101 that Clifford had been dreading without letting himself admit it. The long straight past the marine headlands, where the car had shuddered most violently, where he had pulled to the shoulder with his hazard lights on while an elderly couple stopped to check on him. He didn't slow down. 70 miles per hour, 73, 75. The Ferrari ran like something restored to itself, like something that had been trying to speak for 2 years and had finally been heard. At the crest of the grade, Clifford pulled to the shoulder and stopped the engine. He sat with his hands on the wheel and the silence of the stopped car around them, and the light going amber over the bay below. He didn't move for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Something in it had come loose. "Sophie's back," he said. "She's back. Ah." Zara said nothing. She understood that there are moments when the right response is not words, when words would reduce something rather than honor it. Lou had taught her that too, though not intentionally. He had taught it by the way he sat beside Marcus's photograph in the storage unit sometimes, in the middle of a lesson, just sitting, not explaining. They stayed on that shoulder for 4 minutes. Then Clifford started the engine again, and they drove back to the city, and the Ferrari ran perfectly the entire way, and not once did Clifford's hands tighten on the wheel. When they pulled back into Sutton Elite Motorworks, the crowd inside had been waiting in a silence that had grown heavier with every passing minute. The service bay door opened. Clifford stepped out. He looked around the room, at the technicians, the journalists, the experts, Blake Sutton's ashen face. He was smiling, not the practiced smile of a man who had spent 50 years in boardrooms. Something older than that. Something that had been waiting underneath all the other expressions for 2 years, preserved by a car that a woman had saved 3 years to buy because she loved him, and she understood him, and she wanted him to always have somewhere beautiful to go. "Every road," he said simply. Not once. Renee Fontaine stood. The room held its breath. Renee Fontaine did not clear her throat or call for attention. She simply stood, and the room quieted around her the way rooms quiet around people who have earned a specific kind of authority. Not the authority of title or volume, but the authority of someone who has spent 23 years learning exactly what excellence looks like and is now in the presence of it unexpectedly. She looked at Zara Mitchell for a long moment. "In 23 years with Ferrari Heritage Division," she said, "I have reviewed hundreds of diagnostic cases, factory technicians, independent specialists, engineers with advanced degrees, and decades of documented experience." She paused. "What I witnessed today was not competence. Competence is common. What I witnessed today was artistry." She opened her portfolio and removed a card. "Ferrari North America operates a Heritage Technical Academy in partnership with the Maranello factory. Full curriculum. Hands-on training with original factory engineers. It has produced 31 graduates in 12 years. She set the card on the workbench beside Zara. All 31 were adults. All 31 had prior professional certification. Another pause. Another, "We have never accepted a 15-year-old. We have never accepted anyone without prior credentials." She looked at Zara. "We would like to make an exception. Full scholarship. Beginning next summer." The front rows did not make a sound. Donna Mitchell, in the back row, pressed both hands over her mouth. Clifford Hargrove stepped forward. "Before anyone responds to that," he reached into his coat and removed an envelope. "I've had my attorney prepare this over the last week. I wasn't certain I'd need it. I'm certain now." He set it on the workbench beside Renee's card. An educational trust in Zara's name. Full funding through doctorate level if she chooses it. No conditions, no restrictions, no strings of any kind. He looked at Donna. "Mrs. Mitchell, I would like to offer you the position of estate manager at the Hargrove property. Full-time, full benefits. A salary that means you don't work 2 jobs anymore." His voice was even. "You've worked for me for 3 years. I should have offered this sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." Donna Mitchell made a sound that was not quite a word. She pressed her hands harder against her mouth. Her eyes were closed. Lou Caruso rose slowly from his chair in the back row. Clifford looked at him. "Mr. Caruso, I'd like to fund the complete restoration of your workspace as a formal training center. Equipment, materials, operating costs for 5 years. He paused. One condition. Lou raised an eyebrow. Zara helps you teach. Lou looked at his student. This girl he had found in a basement boiler room 6 years ago, with a bobby pin and a composition notebook, and a quality of attention that he had spent 34 years at a Ferrari factory learning to recognize. He thought about Marcus. He thought about what it means to pass something forward when the person you most wanted to pass it to is gone. Deal, he said. The service bay has the quality of a room in which something has concluded. Not ended, but concluded, the way a piece of music concludes, leaving a silence that still contains the notes. Then Blake Sutton's assistant appeared in the doorway with a folder. The audit had begun the previous afternoon. Ferrari Heritage had requested it as standard procedure following any diagnostic dispute involving a Ferrari-certified facility. What the auditors found, working through the night on 24 months of service records, was not a complicated story. It was a simple one, and simple stories are often the worst kind. Charges for diagnostic procedures, documented as performed on dates when the vehicle's GPS data showed it had not been at the facility. Parts billed as replaced that bore their original 1964 manufacturer markings. Labor hours that exceeded, in 3 separate instances, the total number of hours the shop had been open on those days. A pattern across not just Clifford Hargrove's account, but 11 other client accounts over 4 years, that was consistent with systematic billing fraud. Renee Fontaine forwarded the preliminary findings to Ferrari North America's legal team at 9 p.m. that evening. The California State Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation 6 days later. Greg Sato's article ran in Auto Heritage Quarterly with the headline, "The $60 Fix: How a 15-year-old Found What $2.1 Million Couldn't." It was the most read piece in the magazine's 40-year history. 3 national publications picked it up within 48 hours. Blake Sutton's name was removed from the board of the Pacific Automotive Excellence Council on a Thursday morning by unanimous vote, without a statement. His membership in 2 industry certification bodies was suspended pending investigation. His photograph came down from the wall of the shop, not dramatically, not publicly, but quietly, the way things that were never earned tend to disappear. Tyler Crane appeared at Lou's storage unit 4 days after the evaluation. He stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. He was in civilian clothes, not the Sutton uniform. He looked like a man who had spent 4 days in an argument with himself and arrived at something uncomfortable but necessary. 14 years, he said. I thought that meant I knew things. He looked at Zara, who was at the workbench cleaning a carburetor. You made me remember that knowing and listening aren't the same thing. I forgot that somewhere around year 8. He swallowed. I'd like to learn how to do what you do. I know I don't deserve to ask. Zara set down the carburetor. She looked at Lou. Lou's expression said, your choice. She looked at Tyler for a long moment. At this man who had laughed at her in a room full of people, who had made her mother flinch, who had spent 14 years confusing habit for mastery. Saturdays, she said, 7 a.m. Bring breakfast for Mr. Caruso. She picked the carburetor back up. Fruit, not pastry. 1 year later, a new sign hung above a restored workshop in Oakland, the Caruso Mitchell Institute for Automotive Arts. Inside, Lou Caruso sat in a comfortable chair near the window, the chair Clifford had bought him, the one with the good back support that Lou had resisted accepting for 3 weeks, before admitting that his spine was grateful. He watched from there, mostly. Occasionally he spoke. When he spoke, people stopped what they were doing. Zara stood before 14 students, former mechanics between jobs, teenagers from the neighborhood, two ex-Sutton technicians rebuilding something, a retired postal worker who had always wanted to understand engines and finally had the time. She was 16 now. She stood the way Lou had taught her to stand, grounded, unhurried, present. On the wall behind her, a framed photograph of a red Ferrari 250 GT Lusso on a California highway, taken from a distance, moving fast and perfectly smooth. Beside it, in Lou's handwriting on a piece of cardboard he had written on the night after the evaluation and given to Zara the following morning. The car is not broken. It is speaking. Your only job is to hear it. Zara picked up a timing light from the workbench. Forget everything you think you know, she said. Today, we learn to listen. Blake Sutton spent $2.1 million because he trusted credentials over curiosity and instruments over intuition. A 15-year-old girl with super-glued shoes found the answer in 20 minutes. Not because she was smarter, but because Lou Caruso had taught her the one thing no certification can give you: the humility to stop talking and actually listen. If this story moved you, drop your location and the time where you're watching from. We read every comment. And if you know someone the world has been too quick to overlook, share this with them. Subscribe because the Zaras of this world deserve an audience.